Chapter 12 of The Wonderful Flight to the Mushroom Planet. The Wise Men Who Weren't Very Wise. But they were people like themselves, with bodies and arms and legs and heads and faces like their own, or at least as near like their own as to make no difference. David and Chuck drew together, standing silently. The two little men, upon suddenly spying them, stopped, stared, and then, as though hypnotized, came slowly forward. As they came near, it was seen that they were not as like Mr. Bass as they'd first appeared, but rather like an exaggerated Mr. Bass. Their heads were larger and more dome-like. Their faces were smaller and paler, almost gray. Their eyes were huge, with great brown staring eyes. Gentle, frightened eyes, like a tarsiers, thought David, and he had to hold his breath in wonder and surprise. How were they dressed? Well, it looked to David as if the cloaks and skirts of these two little beings, not quite as tall as he and Chuck, draped about them in a kind of Greek way. They were made of soft plastic. They seemed to be made of the material that raincoats are made of nowadays, that smooth, rubbery stuff you can almost see through. It fell in nice folds, and one little man's skirt and cloak were soft cream, and the others were pale, pale pink, exactly the shades of the great mushroomy plants that were growing all about. Now the two little men came right up to them, their eyes peering and peering, first at the boys, and then at the great spaceship towering behind them. Their long, pale hands were held up in front of them as though fending the boys off, and perhaps the spaceship too, as though they wanted not to be hurt. "But we wouldn't hurt you," burst out David, because he had to answer that frightened look. Now the two little men seemed to relax somewhat, and they took small, quick looks at the boys' clothing, then drew their eyes back to the boys' faces as though they felt they'd been impolite. "I am Meeb," said one of the little men, almost in a whisper, and took another odd, careful look at the spaceship, as though he thought it might be alive, as though it might jump around and eat him. "I am Oru," got out the other little man, and he too took a sideways, odd look at the thing. "But it's dead," laughed Chuck. "It isn't alive, like we are, I mean. It just goes when you want it to." But still, the little men would not come nearer, nor look at the spaceship straight on. "If you're afraid of it, how did you have the courage to come over to us at all?" It seemed to David that Meeb and Oru had been drawn over the ground as though pulled by something they couldn't help, even though they were scared to come. "We had to see," said Meeb. "We just had to. We always do have to see everything." "That's what I thought," grinned David. "Why were you crying?" asked Chuck then, just as he would have asked a small boy who's been hurt. "Because we're to have our heads cut off in the morning." "Squirp," said Oru, making a swipe across his throat with his finger. Then the two little men wrung their hands and began groaning all over again. "Squirp," repeated David in horror. "You mean you're going to be beheaded?" Meeb nodded. "There's no help for it," he said tragically, his huge eyes swimming with tears. "The time is too short to get to the bottom of our trouble now, and we can't think fast enough when we're worried." "But why are you to be beheaded?" cried Chuck. "Because," began Oru. "The great Ptah," said Meeb, "ordered that if—" "Now you let me tell," interrupted Oru angrily. "You always want to tell everything, and you get it all mixed up." "So do you," snapped Meeb. "I never knew anyone to get everything so mixed. The only time you are sensible is when you inscribe in your rolls of wisdom." But David put up his hand. "Now, please listen," he said firmly. "We've been sent here by one of your kinsmen on Earth to help you in your trouble. The only way we can help is to be taken to this great Ptah. And while you take us there, you can be telling us the whole thing. Now, Meeb, you begin. And when you're through, Oru can tell us about the great Ptah and what kind of person he is." "But before that," put in Chuck, wanting to get first things first, "just who are you two?" "We," said Meeb and Oru together, are Taw's wise men. Only, said Meeb sadly, we haven't been very wise. We have failed. But now I'll tell you about the trouble. And all four of them began walking off together. You see, to begin with, there's a plant, a magic plant, that grows high in the mountains. The jar, shouted David all at once, clapping his hand over his mouth. The canning jar! I forgot it again, Chuck. I just don't think I'll ever get it safely to Mr. Bass with the basidium air in it. He dashed back, grabbed around in Chuck's bag, got out the canning jar full of sugar, dumped the sugar in a white heap on the moss while Meeb and Oru stared. Then set the jar open with the lid nearby, in one of the corners made by 2 tail blades of the ship. There, he said. Now, Chuck, don't let me forget to take it home. Okay, here we go. We've got to hurry. Once more, they started away, and Meeb continued. As I said, there is this magic plant that grows high in the mountains. It is a food we have to have or we die, because it has something in it. We don't know what. And it grows in only one place. It looks somewhat like the other foods we eat, there, and there, and there. He pointed about, but the plants he pointed to all looked the same to David, the same mushroom-like growths. But this plant is not the same as the others. When we don't eat it, we grow grayish, as you see us now. A healthy person is pale green. But the terrible trouble is, we have no more of the magic plants. What few are left, we're going to give to the children that they may live. They are the only ones of us now who are a fine, healthy green, as you will presently see. But Meeb, cried Chuck, why are there no more of the plants you used to have? What happened to them? Will there never be any more? You see, they all died. There came a great hotness, broke in Oru excitedly, waving his hands upwards, and Meeb turned on him in a fury. I'm telling. Then he turned back with offended dignity. As I said, this plant grows high in the mountains, at the place of the hidden water. And the interesting thing is that the smell there has always been very thick and strange. Sickening, remarked Oru. Silence, barked Meeb. We will probably have to take you there if you're to help us at all. Then you can smell the smell for yourselves and see where the plants grow, and maybe tell us what you think about the water that comes up out of the ground. Always enough of these plants have come up in a season to give us a good amount to dry until the next time of new growth comes. But the great Taw, in his enormous wisdom, had often asked himself, and us, what if some sudden change in the air destroyed our precious plants before we could gather enough of them to dry and store away? So he ordered us to think about this, and to find what wonderful treasure they hold that our bodies need. Then if our supply failed, or the air changed, we would know how to grow more, or grow them in other places. But now Meeb and Oru stared shamefacedly at the ground. And did you think? Asked Chuck. Yes, we thought, but not enough. We kept putting off, because the puzzle was so hard. And the great Taw would call us to him, and we would have no answer, until finally, groaned Oru. Finally the thing came that Taw had feared. The air changed. It grew hot, so hot that we could not work. Our people sat around gasping, and the wet ran down our faces. When the gatherers of the precious plants went to the place of the hidden water, all our crop was dead, black and slimy. Not one was left, not one. A few dried plants from the last time of new growth are all we have left. And so, you see, finished Oru, we are done for. And with glassy eyes, he again drew a long, spindly finger across his thin, spindly neck. David shuddered and thought what a wee little whack it would take to finish him off. But now, went on Oru, in a speech-making voice, and you could tell just how much he'd been looking forward to his turn, I will tell you about the great Taw. He is the wisest one of all, the only one of our people who is able to understand the deep and difficult things we too put in our wisdom rolls. He is... But just then, both little men looked on ahead and stopped. And the boys looked, and there stood a personage only slightly taller than themselves, but whom they knew at once to be the great Taw, because of a certain unmistakable kingliness about him. He was dressed no differently from Meeb and Oru, except for a necklace of great, richly colored stones around his neck, and a long, gleaming staff in his hand. He stood and looked at them levelly and calmly, with no change of expression, even though, of course, he'd never seen anyone like them in his life. Meeb and Oru bowed low to the ground, so Chuck and David did the same thing. "I am Taw," said the man in deep tones. "I greet you." We're," began David, his heart thumping in his chest. "I'm David Topman," he said, and how peculiar his own name sounded to him all at once. "I'm Chuck Masterson," added Chuck, sounding rather stifled. "Where have you come from?" asked Taw in his booming, regal voice. "You are strange ones." "We come from Earth, sir," said David. "We came in a spaceship because one of your kinsmen on Earth said that you needed help." "Earth? What is this Earth? And what is this spaceship you speak of? I do not know these words. Come closer and tell me these things." So then David and Chuck approached, and Taw seated himself on a rock. "There's the Earth," David told him, and he pointed up to where, glimmering vaguely beyond the greenish mist, loomed a huge round shape many times larger than the sun, which was shining upon Earth from the other side of the sky. "Ah, yes," exclaimed Taw, looking up, as did Meeb and Oru, whose mouths were hanging open. "You come from there, from our great protector. If the protector had been between us and the Hot One, we should not be in our present danger. Your protector is the Earth, our home, and the Hot One is the sun, but you couldn't live without the sun." "You are wrong," boomed Taw. "The Hot One did us the evil. And, of course, those two foolish creatures there, my so-called wise men. But they shall learn that it does not pay to be foolish." "You are cruel," burst out David. "You're cruel to behead them. What good will it do to you to take their lives? You're all going to die anyway." Chuck gasped in horror, and Meeb and Oru seemed to shrivel. They hid their faces, terrified that one should speak to the great Taw like this. But Taw gave a slow smile. "You have courage, strange one from the protector, but they must die because they have failed." "Yee, yee," cried Meeb and Oru softly, and they beat their breasts and bowed their heads. "Yee, yee, yee." "Anyway," said David, "we've been sent to help, so we've got to hurry, and maybe we can save them as well as the rest of you. Great Taw, will you take us to the place of the hidden water so that we can get on with our job?"